Welcome to Powerbuilding, Fund the Future. Brought to you by New Media Ventures, this show dives deep into the transformative work of our founders, partners, and fellow ecosystem leaders who are actively dismantling systemic inequities and building pathways to collective liberation. I'm your host, Abigail Leung, Investment Associate at New Media Ventures. For this season, I'm joined by my co-host, Callie Chamberlain, our 2024 Entrepreneur in Residence. For today's episode, we're digging into the journey of building the largest nonprofit media organization for Black Americans. We're excited to welcome Julian Walker and Tareq Alani to the podcast.
Amazing. So maybe to kick off, it would be great to have both of you introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're working on now.
Excellent. So I'm Julian Walker. I'm CEO of PushBlack, founding team member of PushBlack. I'm a storyteller. I am a social entrepreneur. I'm a community advocate. And I have the great fortune of leading the team at PushBlack as a CEO and the chance to do all of those things that I enjoy doing. That's the high level about me, I suppose.
I'm Tareq Alani. I like solving problems, but more specifically, been working in the nonprofit and campaign space my whole career. Got my start knocking on doors, shifted more into the data, product, and tech side of things. About a decade ago, co-founded PushBlack with Daryl Scott, who's an entrepreneur at residence with New Media Ventures now, and also with Julian. And about a year ago, cycled off of PushBlack, and it was time, and co-founded Chorus AI because kind of like bringing it back is, I think there's not a whole lot of software for our industry that's actually built for us, and I wanted to build something that actually serves nonprofits and campaigns and social impact organizations.
Amazing. I'd love to hear next a little bit about how you two met, and with Daryl, obviously the three of you came up with this idea together.
Sure. Tareq, you can take the lead on that.
So yeah, we actually all met at Davidson College when I think we were all 17 years old. We all lived in the same dorm, and Daryl and Julian were both from Little Rock, and me and Daryl were next door neighbors in the dorm, and we just started going to lunch together, and chatting, and we became friends, and I think we all had similar enough interests. We were both all passionate about the world, and so like we'd already had a decade of friendship before we started PushBlack, and then that's kind of how we met, more so in the friendship school type of lens, but we had similar interests and we saw the world in a lot of similar ways. And then I'll pass it to Julian to kind of take the story from there. I think he tells it well.
Cool. I'd say around 2015 is when I remember getting an email from Daryl and Tareq. I think it was March 2015. And they had been working on an idea they wanted to, I think, just share, I assume, to share with me and get my opinion on. And this was within a year, not even a year, of the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and the uprisings and demonstrations and protests across the country. So our community, the Black community, was facing challenges that were in your face in a very specific way and looking for ways to address it. And there was a variety of ways that were being taken and considered. And when I got the email, I had a conversation with them, and what they were expressing, at least what I heard, was that, hey, there seems to be an opportunity here to use media to form relationships with members of our community in order to mobilize them to take action. And at that time, the specific action that I recall was around voter engagement, recognizing that there was a gap in the rates that Black folks turn out to vote compared to white folks turning out to vote. And my understanding was that the work that Daryl had been doing in the nonprofit space and with Accelerate Change specifically, he was observing how some organizations were trying something similar and succeeding with similar approaches. And Tareq was in the space, as he mentioned, knocking on doors, canvassing. So they had that experience there. And then I had just finished film school, MFA program in Chicago for film directing and screenwriting. And I just moved to Atlanta. I was doing film and video production work freelance. So the lane I was in was the creative space and storytelling space. And I was excited to get the chance to do what I think my purpose has always been, which is to contribute my skills to the community. So if you're talking media, that's storytelling, that's content and narrative. So, after that call, I was committed and, or at least intrigued in doing whatever was possible. We didn't have any significant money for any of us, I think, to leave what we were doing full time, but it started there, and then it went from there. I'll pause there because I could go in a number of directions, but I'll pause for now.
Great. And Tareq, did you want to add anything to that initial beginning?
No, I think that's right. I think one thing I'll add there is, kind of, as Julian mentioned, Daryl and I had been talking a little bit, and Daryl was actually really excited. Before we started PushBlack, he was working on a project that was, as Julian kind of alluded to, like trying to use media and social media to engage Black voters, and the funding fell through for it. So we were actually just sitting at a bar one day, and he was a little disappointed, and kind of like, a little frustrated, like, damn, I was really passionate about this project. And so, we were chatting, like, let's just do it ourselves. Like, that was kind of literally what we said. And I think the next day we emailed Julian and was like, hey, this is what we're thinking about. This is why. And kind of the rest is history in a way. There was like a lot of pain and stuff not working in between that, but that's the long story short.
Yeah. Can you talk to us a little bit about the genesis for the idea? It sounds like the recognition of some sort of gap within your community and you all seeing that that was something you could fulfill. How did you take that idea from something that was a conversation between the three of you to what it is today? And I realize that's a really big question because there's so
Yeah.
much that has happened in that space, but maybe talk to us about the beginning stages of that.
Totally. So I'm going to talk about it from like the product and science side of things, which is what I'm good at talking about, and then I'll pass it to Julian to talk about the art and creative side of it,
Cool.
because I think both of those combined are what really make PushBlack powerful. So I think, right, a lot of it was looking at the landscape, right? Like we talked about the fact that, and it still exists today, there's this racial voting gap and really just a civic engagement gap. And that is because people feel disenfranchised, right? And maybe right, well, not maybe, and rightfully so. But we also understood is like the way that campaigns and nonprofits worked at the moment, it felt very transactional to Black communities, right? Showing up and knocking on a door or sending a text message or a phone call every 2 or 4 years. Our insight was that was never going to actually change civic engagement at any scale because it felt transactional because it was. So our hypothesis was that by building daily, weekly, monthly relationships with people, trusted relationships, that we could actually transform civic engagement at scale for Black Americans. And the way that we thought was best suited to do that was through media. So that was kind of like the initial insight and hypothesis. So then from there, and this is maybe different than I think media has changed now, and a lot of media organizations are following this approach. But at the time, this was pretty novel. Is we didn't set out to like put a media brand or views or issue areas onto people. Instead, we actually started PushBlack by doing 100 interviews with Black Americans like our age and older, and just ask them, hey, like, what do you care about? What's missing in media? And that's kind of how we first put out a media product. It didn't work, but it was a good starting point. And then from there, we were able to iterate, talk to more people, do surveys, run ads. And finally, we found that sweet spot around content that people were really passionate about and would want it to continue to read and consume every day. So that's kind of like how we approached it and how we were like figured out, hey, what's the problem and how do we think we can solve it and why?
Thank you, Tareq. And then from the content and the storytelling side, once we had that data from those conversations and folks were telling us what they were interested in, we saw certain content areas rise to the top. Black history was one that rose to the top. There were some others that rose to the top. I can't recall how many we actually tested, but I was most excited about Black history, and I'm just personally excited and interested in that. And I had formed a perspective on it that said, okay, history should not just be a series of fun facts or names and dates. It should be a tool that we learn from and apply those lessons from. So just like you're looking at historical trends in other areas of life or business, you can look at historical trends in terms of people, and culture, and society. There's a story behind those numbers, those names and dates, those actions that I think is often overlooked when we're looking at the mainstream narratives that are put in the history books or just sent around, in Black History Month. So I'm pairing perspective with that, with a storytelling lens, right? So I mentioned the perspective, and then I mentioned that I was coming from a filmmaking background. And so I was trained in storytelling in a certain way. And so it was on me to figure out, okay, well, if we're going to do this in a meaningful way, then we can't just give folks the same old, same old. What if we structured it in a way that had a flow to it, that flowed like a story in a traditional sort of Western format? Because that's what our audience is most used to right now. So, what if we structured it in a certain way and had a focus on character and a focus on, the different parts of a story that make it engaging? And in doing that, that allowed us to pair something that is engaging and emotionally compelling with a perspective, and turn something that for a lot of folks is dry and, this is just in the past, what does this matter to me, turn that into, this is something that is both engaging and valuable and useful, and most importantly builds that trust. And so we went through, probably countless iterations of that as well, trying to figure out the best way to connect both on the platforms that we were distributing on, with the capacity we had as a writing team from, a very small team at the beginning. So figuring out the best ways to engage our audience in what we were hearing that they wanted to see was an interesting challenge. And we ended up figuring out some good ways to do that have been pretty successful so far.
That's super interesting. I'm curious what obviously you've gotten to this place of storytelling and even organizing people that is super successful, and we can see that on your platforms and with your impact. But I'm curious, were there any, like, I'm sure it wasn't easy out of the gate, so I'm curious what kind of like pivots you maybe had to make in order to find your way to where you are now.
Yeah, I think we had to make a lot of different pivots. So like right on the technology side, it took us a while to figure out our distribution platform. So we started trying to use like email newsletter, and it didn't work. Like people weren't opening and engaging at the rates we wanted to. Part of that was the content, part of that was the medium and distribution. We then switched over to text message and started getting a lot of traction there. The problem with text message is it's extremely expensive. And if people aren't paying for that product, it doesn't work, especially because part of our core hypothesis was that we need to be a scaled media company, right? Or like at least semi-scaled. We need to have millions of subscribers because, we're talking about changing people's, likelihood to vote by like a percentage point or 2 or 5 percentage points, not by like a huge amount. So in order to have like systemic impact, you have to have huge scale. And so that made text message really hard. And then also like just sharing in text message is tricky as well. So one of the biggest pivots that really unlocked us as an organization was when we pivoted onto Facebook Messenger when they opened up their API. Because that enabled a couple things. One, at the time, not anymore, but it was the most popular social media app for Black Americans. I think like 22 of like 34 million Black adults were on Facebook Messenger and active users. So A, it was a platform that we actually had the potential to scale on. And then two is it was free to message on that platform. And there was sharing built in. So we were able to leverage like the power of text message where we had gotten traction, but find a low cost way to distribute, tell stories, and then also build in viral sharing. So that was like incredibly powerful and like unlocked our growth. It unlocked our ability to experiment with like formats, like mixed media, etc. So that's probably like our biggest pivot that like unlocked the organization in a lot of ways. I think right now what we're seeing is we are in the middle of having to try to figure out another pivot, right, which is like exciting, and Julian can speak more on this, but like people are now shifting away from Facebook Messenger. Like we even did this thing with our staff where we were like, hey, how many of you were using Facebook Messenger every day 5 years ago? And they all raised their hands. And then I'm like, how many are you using it today? Like even weekly? And maybe like, a fifth rose their hands, right? So like media and platforms are always changing. So now we're trying to actually interestingly going back to email and text message and finding success there, trying to get onto YouTube, TikTok, you name it. But that's one big pivot that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing some of the challenges, because I think in our society, we have so much excitement around entrepreneurs, and oftentimes there's not enough depth and discussion around the challenges. And so I guess I'm wondering, we've heard a little bit about the product and the need. Can you tell us a little bit about what the funding experience was like for you all in operating in that space and sustaining your organization?
Sure. You know what's interesting is that I used to repeat to Daryl when he would tell me about the fundraising. I don't envy you at all in that position doing that work. It sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. I've realized now firsthand. It can be powerful when you find those that are aligned and strong partnership, and we have some strong partners. That it's not just a transaction relationship with us. There is both the care for the people and the work involved and the mission, and that's powerful. And those are some of the conversations I enjoy the most. Some of the interactions, that I enjoy the most. And then you have some others that are a bit more transactional, and there's a space for that as well. It is what this is an enterprise. There are transactions involved. It is what it is. As long as everyone is clear-eyed around what we are committing to for each other and to the world, really, and have an understanding that this may not be permanent, but it is valuable at least for now. So I look at it in those two ways, and it's great when folks are able to not just align on the mission, but say, okay, this is also the impact that I want to see in the world, and I understand how you all are doing, and I'm curious about it, and I want to ask questions and become a partner to help achieve even more. That's been valuable, and that's helped us grow. Partners such as Accelerate Change has always been a strong partner to us in that regard, and we have some others that have been strong partners throughout. I think it might be like 2016 when Daryl was first connected to NMV and pitched and got that initial funding. But since I became the leader of PushBlack around 2020, 2021, and got reconnected to NMV, I've appreciated the community that's built and the support system that is there, even for us as, you know, from a portfolio long ago. Being invited to the events that you all invited me to something you all were having in Atlanta, so I was able to interact with some of the new folks in the portfolio and leadership over there. Phil and Carlicia have been helpful in making connections and introductions and offering input, even at this stage in the organization, in Push Black's life. And neither of them were there, I think, when Push Black first got funding. So it says a lot that it's not just based on who's there now, but it seems that there's an infrastructure there to provide ongoing support and partnership in whatever way can be helpful, even outside of an initial round of funding. So that's been my experience, and I would imagine it's the same across the different portfolios and cohorts. So it's powerful to have partners like that who will show up and who will answer your phone call for, hey, let me get your advice on this or that. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Who should I talk to? And then when it comes to some of the other challenges, it's interesting. So I think I think it's hard to navigate this type of question while I always have a fundraising hat on. But I think what can become challenging is that I think there are folks who are well intentioned, misguided. Those types of relationships don't really work out, right? So we build our work based on our care for the community and the trust they have in us. But oftentimes, with philanthropy in general, there is that power dynamics where folks that have access to resources often feel as if that means there's certain demands that can be made or a certain heavy handedness that comes with, hey, why don't you tell Black people this, for example? And we pick up on that, and that's not a value to us. And I think it's helpful for not just us, but for any person, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, raising money. Just that old adage of all money is not good money, right? So if you're out there fundraising, you're like, okay, if I commit to this, then is it serving my core community or core customer, or is it serving the funder's interests more? And that's a decision that leaders have to consistently balance, right? Trying to continue making payroll and serving the community while also like, hey, there's a quid pro quo here that is not related to impact. So those are initially I was tough to navigate when I was first brand new in this space. But as I have grown more and been able to see that for what it is more, then I've become more comfortable passing on opportunities that may not be a strong fit, right? And just because it's not a strong fit for us doesn't mean it's not a strong fit for some other organization. And that's fine as well. I think within this space, you should be able to find those that are the most aligned and most matched. Like with any type of relationship, it's everything's not for everybody. So I hold I think no more or less of, any engagement I've had that didn't work out in that way. It's just, it is what it is. And it's one of those things where you have to not take it personal, because I don't think any of it is personal, but everyone has interests that are aligned what they see as their vision for the world. And so if you're talking about folks giving money towards an initiative, it needs to be aligned with what they're trying to achieve. And if it's not, then I absolutely respect it when we're able to say, okay, this isn't working. It just won't go farther than the conversation. Or if there was a previous engagement, it just won't go farther than that. And that's fine. I think we're all doing the best we can to say, this is the world we want to see. Let's create this and let's allocate our time and energy and people resource in the best way we can. And you have to make decisions about all those, from the fundraiser side and from the philanthropy side.
Tareq, did you have anything you want to add, or we can move on to?
Yeah, I mean, I think echo everything Julian said. I think I think we having that coming to the understanding early, right? Still not immune to it, still having to fundraise, but one thing that, that's been part of our DNA at PushBlack since the start is diversifying our revenue and income streams. So what's been really cool about that is, Julian and I actually worked really closely together in 2019, I think. 2018, and we developed an extremely robust, subscriber donor program. We'll think about it like kind of like how the Guardian doesn't paywall anything, but they still ask people to donate. We have a very similar program there, and it's raised over $5 million. Probably closing in on $6 million now since we started it. And I think for us that does a couple things. One is it's not a majority, but it's a transformative percentage of our revenue. So it insulates us a little bit year to year. But then two, it also, I think, is an amazing litmus test on the impact we're having on our subscribers. So and that they value the work we're putting on, right? Like our subscribers are making 20, 30, 40K a year. They're not rolling in it, but they are still giving $5, $10, $20, $30 a month. Tens of thousands of them are giving a $20 here and there when they can. And so that's been really powerful and humbling, but also really exciting of kind of trying to figure out a way to cobble together a successful but impactful media company.
I appreciate what both of you are saying, Julian, your candidness around issues in the funder space and kind of the paternalism that's often found in philanthropy when people with money have power. And Tareq, what you're talking to about revenue sustainability. Tareq, I'm curious to dive into a little bit for this last part of the podcast, a little bit into your journey now as a second time founder with Chorus AI. Like, why'd you decide to build that, and what's that been like so far?
Yeah, totally. So I think I started this podcast saying I like problem solving and I like building stuff, and so I felt like I was feeling antsy again. I feel like about a year or two ago, you had a conversation with Julian around that. Thinking about it, and then Sam and Aaron, my co-founders, we worked at our first place together when we were right out of college, and so we kind of, I'd say we were peers and professionals, but we kept in touch, and we were always the ones back in the day when we were working at in campaigns, why are we using fax machines, or why are we emailing Excel sheets? So we were kind of teaching ourselves some tech and trying to, we were always the tinkerers and the fiddlers, and so we kind of kept in touch as a result of that. And so we were all really excited when kind of a lot of this AI tech came to market. And I remember we were actually on a phone call one day, and we realized this stuff is incredible. It's incredibly powerful, but it's actually useless right now for nonprofits or campaigns. And that's because a lot of the AI tech and LLMs they're jacks of all trades but masters of none. But at the same time, having worked in the industry and, we did some customer discovery, talked to a bunch of folks, we kind of had a couple core insights. So one was that, in this industry, we have one job title, but we're doing 5 jobs. And a part of the reason that it is so overwhelming is all the software and tech that we use isn't actually built for us. It's built for the for-profit industry, right? It's built to sell more t-shirts or to get more subscribers or to extract more money, right? Not to have an impact. So then what ends up happening is we end up overpaying for a bunch of software. We need a whole bunch of different ones. And so we're wasting a lot of money. Everything is siloed. right? Like you have to go through 10 different apps just to do one thing. And then that means that a lot of our work grinds to a halt. And we're not actually moving as fast as we can. And that's driving a lot of the inefficiencies. So that's why we kind of started Chorus. We wanted to bring everything together and build software that's actually for nonprofits, for campaigns, so for social impact organizations. So folks can do stuff 10 times faster and have an impact and, not be overwhelmed. So that's kind of like the background and why we're doing it and kind of like the problem we saw in the market.
Would love to jump actually from there, Tareq, because obviously you're working on this product that is like a core solution using AI. I know you've been around product a lot. Right now, we're seeing kind of this rise of generative AI, and we're seeing specifically how it can be used and has been used already to harm underrepresented communities, and specifically the Black community, and also how it has the potential to have a positive impact, right, and empower and uplift. And I'm curious for both of your perspectives, kind of coming in at different angles, right, in this period. But curious, how are you all thinking about AI? Julian, I don't know if you're thinking about incorporating AI PushBlack, what that looks like. Tareq, what your kind of view on like the larger landscape, especially when it comes to building cultural power.
I can speak to it. I think it can be a game changer in a positive way for thinking building cultural power. Culture is something that is created, just something that is evolving. Black folks are one of the, if not the biggest mover of culture in the US for sure, in the world. A lot of times we don't have access to tools to get our ideas out there. So a lot of what we do in creating culture has come from innovation, resourcefulness, taking things that exist for one purpose, remixing, improv, freestyling it to create something that came out of, hey, we may not be able to afford this thing, but we have access to this and we can find a new way to use it. So on one hand, there's no telling what my community is going to come up with as the way for like that AI can be used. And I'm looking forward to that and seeing its impact on culture. And then in a more tangible sense, there's going to be access to ways of telling stories, for example, that were not previously available. I've been, sitting on an idea since film school that could not come into fruition 10 years ago without, you know, finding some way to get into a Hollywood studio. But some of the tools that I've seen with AI are like, okay, I could probably build this or a prototype for this film just based on the tools that I could buy and get on my laptop with if I was had the time to do it at this point. And I'm sure there's millions of folks out there similarly like, okay, well, now we can bring these ideas into fruition in a different way and express ourselves and build and create culture in a tremendous way. And there's power in that, being able to express and shape narratives and shift conversations as we found ways to do over time all throughout history. So I'm excited to see what is possible now. And I don't think there's a neat bow I can tie around that because I always expect the unexpected when it comes to the community.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I think everything you said resonated with me a lot. I'll speak to this from how we're thinking about like AI and responsibility from Forrest's perspective. I think first it's important to acknowledge like technology will always be used for good and for bad. I think social media is a great example. Like I know the last couple of years, there's been a lot of like how social media has been harming democracy, how there has been misinformation being spread, etc. On the flip side, you have organizations like ours, PushBlack, that have been able to turn out hundreds of thousands of voters, if not millions of voters, through the power of social media, educate folks on Black history, etc. Right? So oftentimes, we can blame the technology, but then it's also around like who's using it and how they're using it. So like the way we're thinking about this at Chorus is a few ways. Also want to acknowledge like yes, LLMs are definitely biased, and there's a whole like set of technology and like a whole other podcast around that. But we're trying to tackle these issues at a few ways at Chorus. So like one is everything is like human centered and a human in the loop. So we're not like automatically posting anything, automatically creating everything. Like we're we're designing the app in a user interface that requires like the user to like be involved in every step of any action, which I think is just critical and important for any AI app. I think the next thing, to speak about, and then kind of this is like two birds in one stone, is like, we're always talking about generative AI, but one of the things with AI and not necessarily like large language models is actually the ability to understand and parse information. So like one of the big problems we're trying to solve at Chorus, right, is even when you think about why is it so hard to write or what takes long about writing, it isn't necessarily the writing in and of itself. It's like there's like millions and billions of pieces of information. How do I find the relevant 5, 10, or 20 pieces of information? And AI can actually help do that and help you get that context much more quickly, right? So like what we're able to do at Chorus is like help you find like those 3 Google Docs you couldn't find in the Google Drive search because we're using AI powered search, and surface those 2 articles, and then you can combine those, and you can use AI or not to then write that op-ed or write that story, you name it, or write that grant proposal. So in many ways, right, that's just helping you find that context in a way like that can supercharge that organization that isn't super resourced and doesn't have that staff that they can hire to go and pull that stuff together for you. But then two is a lot of the bias that comes into LLMs is because it's trained on the world and the world is biased. When you actually close the context of the LLM to only the context that you need and want, you are able to like eliminate a lot of that bias because you're giving it the context that you want to provide it. So that's like kind of step number 2. And then I think finally is like, in many ways you can think around, like, I mean, what we were talking about today and like kind of bringing it to cultural media is like, whether it's PushBlack or another portfolio organization, right, is like they're doing a lot of content creation, but a lot of that content creation isn't actually their core product. It's grant proposals, it's quarterly updates to donors and funders, it's updates to other internal stakeholders. It's like just trying to get teams on board and like sharing knowledge with each other, right? So they're not actually creating those stories. They're not doing that storytelling they want to do because they're bogged down by all the other ops, admin, comms, marketing work. So in many ways, right, AI can help unlock that time by doing a lot of that, or 10xing the speed at which organizations can do that to unlock, take PushBlack for instance, unlock its time to actually do that deep storytelling around Black history because we're able to like write a grant proposal 10 times faster, or educate a new staffer and get them up to speed in a day instead of a week, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so those are my thoughts.
I love it. This was such an amazing conversation, very wide ranging. I appreciate both of your insights, your personal vulnerability, behind the scenes look that you've given us into starting an organization and continuing it to grow it into what it is today. Just appreciate both of your time. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for
Happy
having
to
us.
be here. Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Thank you.